good morning and welcome once again to Tiempo. I'm Joe Torres. This morning we will tell you about a new magazine for Latino parents. Very, very helpful. You'll want to see that. But first, an issue and a story that has been making plenty of headlines. The flood of unaccompanied children crossing the Mexican-U.S. border and help for young people in our area. More than 50,000 children from Central America have been caught crossing the border into states like Texas and Arizona. That's just since October. And that has U.S. authorities, as well as people here in New York, scrambling to try and provide services. A debate is now underway and in Washington, in Albany, here in the city, on how to solve this crisis. And this morning we have important information also about a way for many young immigrants in our area to stay here legally. Lots to cover this morning. I'm joined by Francis Madi with the New York Immigration Coalition. Arturo Lopez from BronxWorks. Indiana Porta has been here before. She's an attorney with the New York Legal Assistance Group. Where are the kids coming from? It's not necessarily Mexico. It's Central America now, correct?
That's correct. They're coming from Honduras, from Guatemala, from Nicaragua, and they're coming at a surprisingly huge rate. Why
such a surprisingly huge, or why the sudden influx? What's been happening?
It's the best way to explain it is the amount of violence that's going on in the countries at the moment. It's forcing them to escape. The economic conditions as well plays a huge part.
Yeah, and Arturo, they're coming, you know, it's almost safe to say that they're coming not just as immigrants, but as refugees, right?
Yes.
Almost in a sense?
Yes.
Would that be fair?
Well, they're fleeing danger in their home country, which is the definition of refugee and asylee. You have fear, credible fear in your home country.
Por ejemplo, what sort of danger?
The majority of it is from gangs.
Gang violence.
Gang violence in their home country.
And anecdotally, we have heard that the gang violence has shifted in targeting kids, not just in recruitment, but also in forcing prostitution and threats. We just hear stories that it's more focused on kids, not the violence.
What are the gangs looking for? You just runners, young kids to do what?
I think everything. Just they're trying to recruit, prostitution, drug trafficking, just to expand, I guess, their group.
And Francis, how young are we talking here, roughly, the kids?
We have seen different ages. From 8 years old and younger, but the most that we've seen are teenagers.
Teenagers?
Yes.
And they're coming by themselves?
They're coming by themselves.
Their families have often paid, correct, to safely make it to the border? Or
that's
maybe
correct.
Not safe isn't the word. But
usually through the coyotes that some of us are familiar with, and they make their trip all the way here.
What happens to the kids once they arrive here?
Well, apparently most of them are not running from the authorities. They're surrendering themselves to the authorities, and then they are placed in detention and held for processing.
And how long does that process take, Indiana?
Once the child comes into contact with Customs and Border Patrol, they have 72 hours to be referred to the Office of Refugee Resettlement.
Yes.
And so the Office of Refugee Resettlement right now is setting up shelters and providing immediate social services. And at that point, removal proceedings are started against the child, and they are basically allowed into the United States so that they can litigate their case. There are some cases where the child is released to a family member in the United States.
Okay, I would assume the needs of the kids are many. Let me throw out a few. Psychological.
Yes.
Legal.
You have mental health services, legal services, educational services. There's a lot of different things that we need to start thinking about on how to sustain these children that are coming at them.
Yeah, I mean, you say the key word that I think a lot of people throw out is sustainability. Arturo, how long, people are asking, I think justifiably, how long can we continue to handle this influx of kids, and what are we going to do with them? When someone throws that question at you, what answer do you have?
I think that's a fair question. I think, however, the thing to take into account is that the violence that these children are running from, many of these street gangs were founded and have large groups of members who were themselves deported from the United States and sent into these countries where they continued their violence. So in essence, it's a result of the deportations that we initiated to begin with, that these children's lives are in danger.
But Indiana, what we're seeing is many of these kids are arriving here in New York. And as well as other states, the response of some people is, you know, not in my backyard. I don't want them here. We don't have the infrastructure, whatever it might be. There are a lot of reasons. You know, my question becomes, you know, where are we going to put the kids and how are we going to get them the services they need?
It's a really great question. I know that most of the nonprofit service providers in the area are meeting, and we're trying to come up with a coordinated response, how to address the social service needs, how to address the legal needs. There is an estimate of about 3,300 migrant children that have come to New York in the past few months, and they're expecting about 7,000 more. And all of these children are in removal. So really, in addition to the support, the social service, they need representation.
Yeah.
In fact, we met last week with some legal service providers, member agencies, and even elected officials to figure it out how we can help and support the incoming child migrants in New York State.
I know that federal officials are very hesitant to sort of detail where exactly the shelters are, and I'm not asking you to reveal any trade secrets, but are there shelters in the New York metropolitan area that are housing many of these kids?
Yes, well, they're still trying to figure it out which places are going to be inhabitable and which aren't. We have different places in New York State, from Long Island to Westchester and even Albany, but we don't know where they're looking for exactly.
Yeah. What can the president, what can federal legislators do to help solve this crisis?
They can, if they choose to, they could enact policy that would allow them to remain and streamline the process if they choose to.
The president, we should point out, has taken action. He's asking for, what, $3.7 billion to help accommodate this? I mean, where would that money go and what would it do, Indiana?
I don't know the specifics, but I do know that some of it would go towards border protection, and I'm not sure. I imagine some of it must go to housing and shelter.
I mean, would it help to solve the issue of housing, of shelter, of legal services, of psychological assistance, etc.?
Absolutely, which is why we put together the task force, because we want to be ready once this budget is approved, how we can use it to
you want to have the solutions in line so that when the money comes through. Sit tight, because we're going to talk about DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Some important information coming up on that. More on helping young immigrants stay in this country and pursue their dreams. That's what we're after, right? Welcome back to Tiempo. We're talking this morning about a path to help young immigrants stay here legally. Joining me this morning, Francis Madi with the New York Immigration Coalition, Arturo Lopez from BronxWorks and Indiana Porta, an attorney with the New York Legal Assistance Group. I've got a legal question, so let me go to you, Indiana, and this gets back to what we were just talking to. Let's wrap it up with this. So many of these kids need legal representation. Why? Because if they don't get it, I'm guessing they'll be shipped back, correct?
Absolutely. All of these kids need legal representation. It's very important to screen these children. We believe a large percentage of them are eligible for asylum, special immigrant juvenile status if they have been neglected or abused, trafficking visas, because unfortunately some of them are falling victim to trafficking on their way to the U.S., also other visas for victims of crime. It's really important. They may have relief.
And in those cases, if that is established, what happens? They can stay?
Well, it's a long process in the immigration court. The applications are very complex, so certainly somebody would need an attorney to walk them through the process and prepare.
Understood. I want to talk about DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. We've talked about it on the show before, but we're coming up on a very special time here because this was enacted 2 years ago. Some of the first applicants are coming up for renewal.
That's right. That's correct.
Which means what for them? What's the process of renewal?
It just means that they need to renew, usually between 120 days and 150 days, correct? Before their current DACA expires.
Okay. How long of a process can that take to renew?
It usually takes about 4 to 5 months.
Okay. I don't want to get ahead of myself, Arturo. DACA, the benefits of DACA for kids is?
They can work here legally. And the reason the renewal process is somewhat shorter and less involved is because of how involved the initial process was.
That they've been through the system once already.
Right. So they're basically just renewing.
But it's important to renew.
It is important to renew because once your work identification is expired, you're not legally allowed to work here.
Okay.
But we're still getting plenty of people at our center who are applying for the first time. There is still a lot of young people out there who have not applied who are eligible.
Is there, Indiana, a distinct difference between applying for the first time and renewing?
There definitely
Yeah,
is.
sure.
The amount of proof that you need to submit to meet each of the elements is significantly larger for your initial application. When you renew, you basically need to provide any new information if you've had brush-in with the law, but really, or unless you've traveled. But other than that, you would just need to resubmit forms, resubmit the $465 fees.
Okay. If you've been working, do you need to substantiate that? Do you need to show pay stubs or anything of that nature? Not
Nope.
necessarily.
No, we wouldn't.
Not for the renewal.
And we should point out renewal is rolling. Once this ball has started, it continues, correct?
It continues.
Why so? Because people, it's a 2-year process. So if you signed up in August of 2012, you need to renew in August of this year.
Right, that's correct.
And then it just keeps going thereafter. Are you anticipating a flood of renewals?
No, we're definitely anticipating more renewals now. I actually have to renew my own in December because I applied during a very busy time 2 years ago. So we are expecting between September and October the biggest influx of renewals.
You said it could take 4 or 5 months. Do you get something in return in your hand to show that your renewal application is in the works, that it's happening? If I were to come tomorrow and
If you submit within the proper window, you'll
Yes.
be given a receipt that extends your status for a few months until your new identification card arrives.
until your new paperwork arrives. How much does it cost, Indiana, to renew?
$465.
$465. Is that a burden, or is there relief for people who perhaps can't afford that?
It can be a burden for some individuals. The types of relief that are available out there, I mean, if they're eligible, they could also apply for a fee waiver if they're accepted. And there are also many places here in New York City that they could obtain some loans to help pay for it.
So there are resources for applicants that are out
absolutely.
there. I know you guys have a phone number. If anyone has any questions, what's the number? 212, I think we have it, 627.
2227, extension 227.
And if you call that number, what do you get there?
Someone will be able to help you in English or Spanish.
Walk you through the process.
Right, walk you through the process and give you information about our future clinics.
And tell you what to do and how to renew.
We have clinics coming up the rest of the year.
Magnifico. Thank you guys very, very much. Big topic, big issue. Continued success on the work that you're doing.